Good morning. I'm going to continue my series on the World Championship match between Jan Nepo and Magnus Carlsen. In Game 6, the last game that we looked at was the first decisive game in the championship. A real marathon, 136 moves, and it goes without saying really that if you lose a match like that, it really takes a lot from you as a chess player and as a person. And if you win a game like that, it really gives you a great deal as a player and as a chess person. As a person and as a chess player. And I think we can see that Nepo really struggled after the sixth game, and the quality up to and including the sixth game had been fantastic. Very high quality play from both sides. Interesting ideas in the games that were draws, but excuse me. But you know, one slight mistake in the game that was enough for Carlsen to grind out into a win. The next game they played, Game 6, was a fairly tame draw. I think they were both absolutely exhausted, and there was a rest day the day after the game. So in Game 7, very easy draw, and in Game 8, the game we're going to look at now, Carlsen has white, Nepo has black. Carlsen changed his tack. Before he had played d4 and gone for some kind of Catalan structure. Catalan-like structure, pseudo-Catalan, neo-Catalan, Catalan, depending on how his opponent replied. Now he goes for e4. I'm sure he goes for e4, safe in the knowledge that Nepo will play the Petrov's defence. Let's see what happens. At e4, Nepo plays e5, and the knight comes out to attack the pawn. Oh, sorry, I'm going to get rid of the analysis. And the knight comes out. The Petrov's or Russian defense. Yeah, Nepo is a keen exponent of this. It's a personal favourite of mine. And the reason that I say Carlsen played e4 safe in the knowledge that Nepo would go for the Petrov's defense is with its symmetrical pawn structures and symmetrical pieces. It's well known to be a very drawish opening. I think at master level, I think up to 75% of the games can be draws. So, you know, Carlsen is saying here, yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy that you've got a perfect defense in the Petros defense, but you need to win a game to get the championship off me. So, yeah, a bit of a psychological ploy. But yeah, Carlsen goes immediately for an aggressive idea. d4, the Steinitz attack. So we're back to the first world champion. He was the first person who suggested that this should be the approach to the Petros defence, and it's certainly a difficult game to cope with. So the pawn is undefended. He takes it. Carlsen just develops a pawn. This pawn will be won back. It can't be you can't hold on to it. But now you've not got the opportunity to take back straight away because the knight is attacked. So the pawn comes, and now the knight takes, and we see it's already looking fairly symmetrical. In fact, if Nepo plays bishop to d6 now, we're again in a completely symmetrical situation. There's only one open file, it's shared. Both sides have the same pieces. These are things which make a draw more likely. So Nepo breaks the symmetry with a knight to d7, but then Carlsen restores it by taking that knight. The bishop comes to d7, and the knight comes to d2, and the knight comes to knight takes, and the bishop takes. And now again, Nepo can play bishop to d6 and have a completely symmetrical position, and the completely symmetrical position is achieved. You know, it's not surprising that so many of these games end in draws. There's very little to fight over here, but yeah, they both managed to create something for themselves in this game. Carlsen castles, and Nepo plays h5. A bold move. He's thinking maybe he can play bishop here, go to attack on the queen, and it turns out to be a useful but unusual way of castling. So yeah, good try by Nepo. The queen comes to e1 and says check. The king comes to f8, and Carlsen forces off another pair of pieces because the bishop can't move, it's pinned to the king. That's why I played queen e1 check and not queen e2, which might seem more logical. Queen comes to e7 and Carlsen takes. Now, if he takes with a pawn, it's not a symmetrical position anymore, it's a worse position for Carlsen. So he takes with the queen, and Carlsen plays queen to d2. So, whose queen is in a better place? Well, Carlsen's queen is defensively more solid, Nepo's queen has more attacking chances. And Nepo gets quickly to the open file, but it gets challenged immediately. And the rook comes to h6 so that it can double up. So effectively, he's castled by hand in an unusual way and gotten his pawn out to h5. So this, this looks like it might be a bit of an improvement for Nepo. He's played this well. And so the queen comes to g4, so that if you move this rook, the pawn is taken. Obviously, he can't chase the queen away because the square is covered by the bishop. So he supports this pawn so that he's in a position to move his queen. Carlsen takes off a pair of rooks and takes possession of the open file. Queen comes to f6. Carlsen, in an un-Carlsen-like way, declines the queen swap because he gets to threaten mate on the move. And bishop must come to d7. There's no other effective solution. So he comes to h3, partly to deny the square g5 to the g4 to the black pieces, but partly to give his king a little bit of breathing room. Luft, as we say in Norwegian and German. Pawn comes to h4, so he's got more space on the king side. So we can say that it has been a reasonably successful opening for Nepo. And if we look at the analysis, it's going to say something very close to zeros. But, they both have their own little advantages that they're fighting over. So we'll just check what the analysis says. Plus 0.24 to white. Nothing to speak of. So, yeah. But, he's gained things from his opening. He hasn't just settled for a draw. He's gained things from his opening. So the pawn comes, sorry, I'll get rid of the analysis. So the pawn comes to c4. Obviously he wants to break down the structure. If he takes back, and then he's in a position to play pawn to d5 and go to attack on the a7 pawn. So he takes, and this was a bad mistake by Nepo, because it allows Carlsen to win a pawn. Otherwise, decent move, but the pawn on a7 is undefended, and Carlsen takes advantage of that immediately. Queen to a7 check, and then takes the pawn, and he's threatening the bishop. So if he takes the bishop, he takes the bishop. So he's a pawn up. This was a clear mistake. I don't think Nepo would have made this mistake had it not been for the psychological hurt which came from the sixth game. So yeah, Nepo comes to d8, Bishop comes to b3, so it's not attacked by the pawn anymore. And the rook comes to d6 to double up on the d pawn. The rook comes to e4 to double up, to attack the h4 pawn and to double up the defense on the e5 pawn. The bishop comes to e6, and Carlsen is very happy for all swaps because he's got an advantage, and he's even willing to swap there. And now he's got 6 pawns against 5. Often in queen and pawn endgame, one pawn isn't going to make much difference. Often it's going to be very drawish. But the move b5 didn't just drop a pawn, it also left Nepo's pawns weak. Backwards isolated pawn, backwards isolated pawn. This pawn is only defended by a backwards isolated pawn. This pawn is a bit out in the wilderness. It's a good position for Carlsen. And he comes, of course, to c5. Perfect square. And there's that as well. He's able to take up perfect squares all the time. Nepo goes to attack against the pawn on a2. And Carlsen's very happy with an exchange of prisoners. But he doesn't go directly for the exchange of prisoners. He goes rather queen to e1, so that when the king goes here, he can take the pawn, and he's threatening to get a perpetual check draw. So, you know, he's made his mistake, but now he fights as hard as he can to survive. So the pawn is taken on f2, and as I say, he's threatening check here, check here, check here for the rest of eternity. So Carlsen has to do something about that perpetual check threat, and he takes the pawn and says check, and he plays e4, check, and now it's covering now the e1 square, so he hasn't got the perpetual check anymore, and he moves this pawn away so that it's no longer attacked. He's saying, yeah, you can take this pawn, but then I'm gonna win other pawns. So the queen's taken on a2, and the queen comes to e8. He doesn't take this pawn straight away. This pawn is well restrained by these two. He would rather have this pawn because it gives him a passed pawn. King comes to h7, and the queen takes the pawn, and suddenly Nepo is facing 2 passed pawns. That's too much. And he's only got the one possibility, which is this perpetual check. So as long as he can keep his eye on that all the time, shouldn't be a problem. Queen comes to e5 to stop both this check and this check. So the queen comes to b2. He's suggesting another trade of prisoners. Queen comes to e4 check, king comes to g8. So Carlsen could take the pawn on h4, but then he's given up one of his passed pawns, and he's increasing the drawing chances for Nepo. So instead he plays queen to d3. Fantastic. Cuts out the possibility of the perpetual check, and defends both pawns, and gets behind his further forward passed pawn, so that he's threatening to make his next 4 moves, these 4 moves, and play with 2 queens against 1. Comes to f2, but of course he's still not threatening to come to g3 because it's covered by the queen. So he keeps covering it and plays f3, c3. I'm not quite sure why he done that, but if I remember rightly from what I've seen at the time, it was right. It was. Sorry, that was an accidental arrow. Yeah, if you could play that with a pawn, it might be worth something. But it turns out it was the right decision, if I remember. I would have been tempted just to push the pawn, but okay. So Nepo says check, and the king comes to G1, and he's covering the square here. That's right, he's now covering this. He's come to C3 to cover this square so that he can't get that perpetual, because there's more than one perpetual available. That's the problem. There is more than one perpetual available. So the king comes to H7 and the queen comes to D3 check. Pawn comes to G6, and now the queen comes to D1, and there are no longer any checks on the back rank. So yeah, he might be able to check on this diagonal now, but he'll never get another check on the back rank. So he's taken a little triangulation to get his queen onto the ideal square where it defends this pawn and supports this pawn in its quest to become a new queen. Plays E3 check, he's going to play something, and the king comes to H1. No more checks. Pawn comes to G5, pawn comes to D5, pawn comes to H4, G4, he takes it, pawn comes to, so now if he takes, queen here, and suddenly he's got his perpetual check again. Has Carlsen gone wrong? I think we can trust him more than that. He plays queen to F3, and yeah, then even if he plays here, check, king comes here. If he plays here, check, the queen comes here. If he doesn't take, then he takes this pawn, and he's still not got a perpetual check, and he's still got now 3 pass pawns against now, and that's enough for Nepo, and here he resigned. And if possible, he looked even more beaten than he had looked after the marathon game. So yeah, what can we say? A very, very even game. Some interesting ideas from Nepo. Played really well up to a point, but then made a mistake which gave away a pawn. Just not just giving away a pawn, but giving away a pawn in a way that made it very difficult for him to achieve anything more in the game after that. So yeah, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.